Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Voices have power. Wouldn't you agree? When we hear some voices, they just grab us. And I think that's particularly true for three specific classes of voices, and we're going to talk about them here. The first one is singers. How some of them, when you're in your car, at least me, they kind of force you to sing along with them when you hear it. And so if you look at the music app on my phone, it's a real mishmash. I'm a musical mutt as far as what I like to listen to. It depends on what my mood is and where I'm and what I'm doing. But here are some that I instantly, when I hear these voices, I know exactly who they are. So George Strait, Kenny Rogers, Dolly Parton, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses. I have a roommate, it's a funny story, I'm not going to tell you now, it's too long, but I have a roommate in college that I was his biggest hero because I drew the lottery for number 1 when Guns N' Roses was playing at Arrowhead Stadium in 1994. Concert hall singer Josh Groban is one that when we hear that voice, a lot of us know who that is. Idina Menzel. If you're a fan of Broadway, she is a star in Rent and then in Wicked. Fantastic voice. Elvis Presley. Yeah. When you hear Elvis, you know who that is, right? And then Frankie Valli. If you hear those voices, we instantly know who it is, and they may actually transport us somewhere. If we associate a song with something that happened in our lives, they may actually help us remember those events. And then oftentimes, even with these folks, if we hear just a few bars of a song, we know exactly what it is because we're fans of these people. Okay, so let's take a look at voices of political and social change. Think about these voices. You probably will remember them and instantly know who they are. So, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy, obviously you know Ronald Reagan. But then more recently we've got Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and then Angela Davis is one that crosses a lot of generational boundaries. Now I didn't say you had to agree with them. All I said is you would recognize them and you would know they had something to say. As a matter of fact, that list I just gave you, it would be impossible for you to agree with all of them because I got people on the far ends. United Methodists, we're a big tent, folks. Hillary Clinton's a part of the same church as George W. Bush. Remember that. So those names, like I said, you may not necessarily agree with them, but you would recognize them as people who have something to say. The third class of people I want to talk about today are documentarians, what I call the educators. Yes, I'm a nerd, so I love documentaries, especially really well put together ones. And I think of the voices of documentaries. The one that immediately comes to mind is not one that I have pictured. It's John Chancellor. He was an NBC newsman for many, many years, but he gave the voice to two of the most prominent, most watched documentaries in the history of public television. The Civil War by Ken Burns and Baseball by Ken Burns. He was the voice narrating those two series. But think about the others that we have here. James Earl Jones. When you hear his voice, you think Darth Vader and you think all kinds of other things, right? Morgan Freeman. Peter Coyote is kind of the more recent one. He's now the voice of all the Ken Burns videos. He does those. David Attenborough. A few weeks ago I was talking to you about dinosaurs and this thing I was excited about on Apple Plus, and it really was good. But David Attenborough was the voice behind it. Will Lyman is a name you may not know, but I promise it's a voice that you do. If you've ever watched PBS, especially the TV show Frontline, he's the voice. If you don't ever watch those, if you've watched the Pelican Brief movie, there's a scene in there where they kind of get the whole glimpse finally of what this whole legal case is about, and it's based on a Frontline show that was actually real, and his voice is the one there. And then Kenneth Branagh, who's an actor that if you saw his face, you would probably know who he is. But those are the people that they also teleport us, except this time it's more with our minds. It's helping us understand our world just a little bit better. And then I want to challenge you, voices that are a little bit closer to home. Voices that you will remember instantly that maybe others in the room don't. But you will. Think about your mom. Think about your dad. A spouse. A teacher. A mentor. Maybe it's a next door neighbor. Someone who meant something to you, that gave you advice or instructed you on something, or maybe just gathered you up in friendship. You remember their voices. My favorite teacher, I've told you this I think before, my 6th grade teacher was a small African-American woman, about yay tall. Her name was Roxy Whitaker. She was cool because she drove a Camaro to school. But she's the teacher that was the hardest on me. The first C I ever got in my life, and the only C I ever got until I got to college, was a C+ in science in 6th grade. It was Mrs. Whitaker that gave it to me. She taught me to study. And I can still remember the speech she gave me when she gave me a C on this project that guaranteed I was going to not get a B in a class that I'd never gotten that before. I thought for sure my dad was going to kill me. I'm still here, so obviously that didn't happen. But I remember her voice. To this day, I can remember what she sounds like. These people may be gone from us now in some instances, but you can still hear them in your heads. I promise you that. They take you back somewhere because of the memories that they create for you. There are emotions that come with hearing those words from them. And when we hear them speaking, we kind of make a connection across time and space that we maybe didn't even realize was there. Voices are powerful. And voices can be very profound. They don't even have to be real voices. I'll explain. This church prayed with me for many months for my friend Nathan Stanton, who died back in March. He was the one who had ALS. You may remember me telling you his story. He was diagnosed with what's known as bulbar onset ALS, which is the most cruelest form of the cruelest kind of disease that I've ever heard. First thing it does is it takes your voice, and then it takes away your ability to swallow, and eventually it takes away your ability to breathe. With that particular form of ALS, 18 months is usually the most you can expect to live, and that's exactly, Nathan lived 19 months from the time he was diagnosed until his death back in March. And the reason I tell you that story is because Nathan, before he was diagnosed, was an excellent preacher. He was an even better teacher. He didn't have a thunderous voice, but he had a voice that carried, and he had the kind of voice that connected with people. He could intone his voice in such, when he wanted to make a point, he could either hit you with a hammer, or he could make it smooth as a nice glove, caressing you, holding you, caring for you. He had a knack for that. But over the course of his disease, what happened was, first his speech got a little slower. Matter of fact, we kind of started to wonder what was going on with him, because he was doing a podcast with me, and normally he was quick with his words, and he was slower than I'd ever seen him before. And I come to find out he had actually gone to the doctor the day before to ask questions about what was going on. But then he ended up having slurred speech. And eventually he got what he himself called his drunk uncle speech. He talked a little bit like Otis in, if you're familiar with Andy Griffith, he was talking like that for a while. He had a sense of humor all the way to the end. And at the end, all he had was a digital voice, because he had use of his left thumb, and I can't remember, but it was one of the other fingers on his left hand. That was all he had left, other than being able to blink his eyes. But he would sit there with me in the evenings, and especially if there was a sporting event on that we were both interested in, and we would text each other well into the night. I'd have to wait a little longer for him to respond. He was usually really quick with that, but in the end, because he only had these two fingers, he would text, but it took a while for it to get back to me. So you see, Nathan lost his voice, but he never really lost his voice, if that makes sense. Voices have power, even when it comes on a little screen like your telephone. A strong voice is what we're going to talk about today. And I think it's good because it's the beginning of all living things. Now, I promise you, I'm not going to keep hitting you with creation stories. It seems like we've done that a lot lately, and it's just because of the way things have worked out with different messages I wanted to provide. After today, we're going to leave the creation story for quite a while. I promise you we won't come back to it for a while. But it's the last piece of it that I think I want to get into with you today. It's one of the strongest voices ever heard, even though we've never heard it. And it's the voice of God. Today we're going to talk about what did God say, what happened as a result of what God said, and finally, for all of us, what direction does God give us throughout all those things that He tells us? We're going to look at some verses that we've actually looked at recently here, but I'm going to split it in two and we're going to condense it by quite a bit. We're going to read together Genesis chapter 1, 1 through 4, and then we're going to skip down to verses 24 through 26. Here's what they say. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Skipping down now to verse 24. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humans in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds and of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." May God add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and understanding of Scripture. Normally I read to you from the Common English Bible because I love that translation. But today that's from the English Standard Version because I wanted desperately the words "in the beginning." The other translations have kind of morphed that a little bit. It doesn't quite sound right, so I wanted something that sounded like what you would have heard before. But God speaks, "Let there be light." And there's tremendous light that comes out of nowhere. And then what happens? Well, in day one, there was light. Very quickly, what happens the rest of those days? Day 2, God created an expanse. He created heaven, and He created the atmosphere around us that provides for life. Day 3, He created seas and dry land, and with it came the trees and the shrubs and the grass and the seeds that perpetuate all the things that grow out of the ground. Day 4 is the sun and the moon. We talked about that a few weeks ago when we talked about dinosaurs. Day 5, water creatures and birds of the air. And then finally, day 6, we get the living things. Starting with the dinosaurs, but ending with all the things that we have with us today, including all of us people. God did all of those things. He created everything with a voice. He spoke it. It happened. And it perpetually continues to happen. Creation did not end on day 6. Creation continues to this day. So can you make anything happen just by speaking it? Can you? Well, I'm here to tell you, if you're a mom, the answer is yes. You can nod your head. It's Father's Day. If you're a dad, you can nod your head, at least for this day. Okay? Mom might be back in charge tomorrow, but usually dad gets a little bit of power in this day, so nod your head, that's okay. If you are a teacher, or if you are a boss, if you were a military officer, you definitely can make things happen with your voice. You can say it, it happens, and then you kind of see how well it went. All of those positions that I said to you really have one of three things going for it. They're either a power position because of their age, or they're a power position because of their position, or they're a power position because of their rank, whether it be in the military or in the home or in a business of some kind. But most of those speaking and it happens authorities are on relatively little things in the grand scheme of our world. Think about it for a second. Clean your room. Mom or dad says it, it happens, or at least it should happen. Does it happen back there in the Neisel family? No, I was seeing shaking heads, all right. Be home at a certain time. With our kids, sometimes that didn't quite happen the way it was supposed to, but usually it did. Execute this plan, whatever this plan is. Do this, make sure it happens. If you're a coach and you're disciplining a team and you say, get on the line, you're going to run, usually the team gets on the line. They are not at all happy about it, but they get on the line and they run. My daughter learned a whole new appreciation for that playing college basketball. Holy cow, did they run. She continues to tell me to this day she was never in better shape in her entire life than her time playing basketball in college. Or if you're a pitcher and the coach comes out and says, give me the ball, you're done, hit the showers. That's just the way it is. You don't get to stand there and have an argument. You're done. When God created everything that we went over a few moments ago, though, He did it with just a voice. He spoke it. It happened. And think about it, God did it with no ingredients whatsoever. They didn't exist before. So let's explore this. I know we have a lot of great bakers in this congregation because you've helped me with cookies for Woodlawn several times now. I know you're good at this. What do you need if you're going to bake a cake? Think about the recipe list. Now for me, the first thing that you do is you go to the store and you find the aisle that has Betty Crocker and you pick that box off the shelf and that's what you use. That's what I do anyway. But so many of you do this from scratch. But think about what you need. You need sugar. You need butter. You need milk in a lot of cases. You need eggs, baking powder. Some of you have these things called secret ingredients that make your stuff way better than anything I would make. But all of those ingredients you have at your fingertips, or you can get them. When God said, let there be light, there was nothing to generate that light until God decided to make it. When God decided to make something as simple as a wasp that later would be a jerk to try to get in our church and sting people, God didn't have that before. God made it. I'm sure there's a purpose for wasps. I just don't know what they are yet. We'll ask that when we get there. But trees and all the other things that bring benefit to our lives, they didn't exist before God decided to make them. So if you didn't have eggs, and you didn't have butter, and you didn't have sugar, how would your cake turn out? It wouldn't, right? Yet that's not what happened at all with the creation. God spoke it, it transpired, it happened, and God declared it good. But did you notice in our scripture lesson, the last piece, God gave us a specific direction in the creation story. I want you to look at me in verse 26. Then God said, let us make humans in our image, after our likeness. And here's the important part. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Dominion. That's what God gives us. At the very beginning. Folks, we are not even out of the first chapter of the Bible, and we have a job. And it continues to this day. Dominion. What does dominion mean? It means control. It means authority, command, sovereignty, jurisdiction, power, authority. That's what we're given over the creation that God made. And now think back to those voices that I asked you to explore from your own lives. Mom, dad, spouse, teacher, mentor. They had authority in some way, didn't they, over what you were doing, especially when you were younger. They had power. And friends, God gives us power over the creation. God gives us the responsibility. He doesn't say in there, if they want it, they can have it. No, it says, we will give them dominion. We'll give. If mom or dad, when you were a kid, gave you a responsibility for something, gave you a chore, did you have an option? Or was it something you had to do? I know how it worked in our house. If mom or dad or grandma told me you were going to do something, you did it. I didn't even live with my Grandma Grace. They lived on a farm in Cameron, Missouri, but we would go up there twice a month, and my dad would help my grandfather with repairs of different things. And I remember one summer, my cousin went with us. And we get out of the car, and Grandma walks over. My grandmother was about the size of Fern Nettleton over here. That was Grandma Grace. Grandma walked up to us with a bucket of paint each. She had a white picket fence that went down the whole dirt road of this expanse, the length of their property. She wanted it painted. There was no option. I was taller than my grandmother at this point. I was like 11 years old, and I was way taller than her, but it didn't matter. Grandma had authority. You were going to do the job. God gives us the authority and the responsibility to do the job. So I thought we would do, just to close today, these are going to be really quick hit, but I wanted to give you what are 3 things that we could do starting today to take that authority and responsibility and do something with it. You may already be doing every one of these things, and if you are, fantastic. I needed a reminder on a couple of these things myself, to be totally honest with you, and maybe you do too. So it's a biblical responsibility that we're given. Here are 3 things. First of all, don't waste anything. That means just what it sounds like. Reuse, refurbish, recycle. Do you recycle things at your house? I bet most people do these days. Lawrence actually makes it pretty easy to do that. I will say I wish they would pick the recycle bin up every week, because ours is overflowing by the time the second week gets here, but still, they do a pretty good job with us. Second thing is show care for living things. Talking about habitat here. If you hunt or fish, just take what you and your family are going to use. Now, that was a bigger thing, in all honesty. The congregation that my wife served up in Lincoln, Nebraska, we had a bunch of hunters and fishers. Guys would go out together. It was a good time. But we always talked about, how many fish are we going to take? It was a serious discussion. But how about protecting habitats? Now, my wife and I, we have the same kind of just grass yard. But the last couple of years, we've kind of let the different patches of the area around our house grow some native type grasses. We haven't knocked down every weed. And as a result, we've seen some bumblebees come back. And I saw something in our yard this week. I was actually more excited about this than I should have been. I saw lightning bugs for the first time in our entire time living in Lawrence. They were hovering around these. I give my wife a lot of grief because she loves birds. And so we have 6 bird feeders in our backyard. But it's because of some of those bird seeds falling down and some weeds kind of growing up around it that I see these lightning bugs around every night. So I'm actually kind of careful not to weed eat around those things and just let them go. Protect habitat when we can. And then don't waste food. That's one that all of us could probably get better at. This is the one I had to remind myself of, because I'm kind of bad at this. When you leave a room, turn off the light. It's all about keeping our world clean. And that means not burning more energy than we need to. You may have seen on the news we had a train derailment north of Lawrence here this week that had something like 15 cars of coal that overspilled, and they're still repairing that track, it sounds like, at least as of yesterday. I don't know how. I did notice a train go through here this morning, so maybe they've got it fixed. But turning off light switches, using less water, using cups that can be refilled, that's one I need a big reminder on. I admit I love styrofoam cups because they keep the ice cold longer, and therefore I can have my bigger drink and I can carry my drink with me from place to place. I need to get better at using the reusable bottles. That's going to be my mantra. So next week when you come in here, if I have my big Coke and don't have the reusable bottle, you have every dispensation to smack me on the hand or give me a stern talking to. That's my promise to you today. Now those are 3 things, and there are a lot more, but we're not going to dwell on those today. You need to look at your own existence within the creation of God to figure out what role can you play in helping make it better. But don't forget this. In that very first chapter of the Bible, God gives us authority and responsibility to care for the creation. Now we can't control what others do. We can't control what other countries do when it comes to fossil fuels. We can't control what our neighbor does as far as how much trash he or she generates. But we can control what we do. So that's what I urge you to do today. And keep in mind that those types of instances may not be the thundering voice of God. Whether the voice of God is James Earl Jones or Morgan Freeman or whoever's voice you want to impose on God, it's not that loud voice. It might be a still, small one. Should you pick up that piece of trash that you see on the road? Should you turn off that light switch when you leave the room? Should you not take quite as much water this time around because you don't want to waste it? Those are going to be soft, small voices in the back of your head. So on this day, I just urge you to listen to it. God said, "Let there be light." And I have a feeling it was a thunderous, loud, "Let there be light." I don't know if God's going to talk like that to you. But let's be a little quieter and let's listen. Because God does give you authority. God gives you responsibility to care for the creation. And that's important for all of us. Because we all live this together. Amen.